Good day to all of you from Brisbane in Australia, and thank you for attending our event today. My name is Rebion. I'm the Managing Director of Eyetek. In 2019, I have created Eyetek to supply Australia and New Zealand with exclusive innovations and state-of-the-art technologies. Our goal is to support your success and to improve the lives of your patients. Since our start, I'm pleased to say that we are growing stronger every day thanks to two main factors. Our unique solutions, of course, but also our commitment to establish and maintain a genuine relationship, sometimes old-fashioned, with our partners. I don't like the word client. Many of you must have heard about the Rexona as quite a revolution for the treatment of dry eye, both forms, but most importantly, thanks to our CSO range of instruments. CSO is based in Florence, in Italy. Started in 1967, CSO is still a family-owned company of more than 180 employees that deliver the highest quality instrument to eye care professionals in over 85 countries. CSO is the #1 manufacturer of slit lamp in the world and supplies third-party manufacturers such as Elex and Schwinn for their lasers. But what makes CSO really stand out is the passion they put into their work and their dedication to lead the way when it comes to technology. The Antares topographer, for instance, has led the way for many years now and has inspired its competition to add some dry features into them only recently. But if we are here today, is to present you all with the most advanced pre- and post-operative device that is setting the gold standard today in ophthalmology. Combining spectral domain OCT and Placido disc technology, its name is the MS-39. For this presentation, I wish to personally thank CSO, of course, for their support. Thank you also to Dr. Rick Wolfe, who made time for us to share his experience operating MS-39 for over 2 years now. And finally, a big muchas gracias to Dr. Del Barrio from Alicante in Spain for putting together a fantastic presentation and making himself available for us today. Enough for me now. Once again, thank you all for attending and enjoy.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for attending this meeting. In the first part of the event, my colleague Francesco and I will introduce MS-39 from a technical point of view. In the second part, we will have the pleasure of hosting the speeches of Dr. Jorge del Barrio and Dr. Wolfe, who will analyze our anterior segment OCT from a clinical point of view. MS-39 is a topo tomographer based on Placido disc and spectral domain OCT technology. It allows to get high-resolution anterior segment OCT section. It can measure the pupil diameter in several light conditions. A non-invasive breakup time module is included thanks to the presence of Placido disc. With MS-39 is also possible getting information regarding lens thickness, and of course, it provides a full topographic module. Anterior OCT sections modality allows to use our device as a special slit lamp in order to get high-resolution scans of the entire anterior segment. Here is shown the acquisition display. The upper toolbar allows for the selection of the quality of the scans. We decided to offer also the possibility to get raw quality scans in favor of a really short time of acquisition for those patients that are not able to stay still. This way, we will be able to get images in the 99% of the patients. The width of the scans can be selected between 10 and 16 millimeters, depending on the particular that we want to image. Using the 10 millimeter section, the resolution reached by MS-39 will be 3.5 microns in tissue, the highest achievable on the market in this moment. In this menu, the user can select among several patterns of scan. Single line can be rotated 360 degrees with 1 degree step in order to acquire the desired meridian. Then we have the 2 meridians and the 4 meridians pattern that allow for the acquisition of the 0-90 degrees meridian and for the 0, 45, 90 and 135 degrees meridians. This pattern can be used, for example, to have a battery of scans of refractive treatment, like SMILES or LASIK, in which, thanks to several software tools, will be easy measure the height of flap or the height of cap. This pattern will be useful also in case of ICL implantation, in order to verify the anterior chamber angle and the ICL vaulting. In MS-39 is also available the raster modality that allows to get up to 7 parallel scans ranging from 0.3 to 1 mm of distance. This modality is often used for the evaluation of the effectiveness of filtering blebs or to get pictures of artificial devices as pleasure flow or XEN that are difficult to be imaged. The sector modality provides multiple sections, ranging from 3 to 45 degrees angular distance. This pattern is commonly used with the same purposes of the first three. The last pattern available was developed for the immediate post-op of lamellar corneal transplantation in order to detect eventual graft detachment. It provides automatically a 360 degrees analysis of corneal meridians with 10 degrees steps. This way, with one joystick pressure, the user is able to get a complete analysis in less than 3 seconds. In anterior segment OCT section modality, is also possible to get videos. It will be enough to select single line and enable the video mode. This kind of analysis, combined with the possibility to change the Placido disc brightness, will be useful to get movies of anterior chamber angle closer, as it's shown here. Now I want to show you some post-operative anterior segment section published in our atlas or provided by our consultants to explain the possible clinical application of our device imaging. This is a femtolasic treatment in which, thanks to MS-39 resolution, are clearly visible flap thickness, flap profile, and residual stomal bed. In this patient, as is visible, it was implanted an ICL. During the post-operative course, thanks to MS-39, it was possible to acquire dynamic images of the anterior chamber in order to evaluate vaulting and ICL positioning during accommodation and in scotopic, mesopic, and photopic-like conditions. This is a Xengen implant for open-angle glaucoma treatment. Anterior segment OCT allows the operator to check the correct positioning of the device in the anterior chamber, to follow with pact along the sclera, and this positioning in the subconjunctival area. MS-39 also provides valuable information about the filtering bleb in the post-operative follow-up. Here is shown a like refractive treatment for hyperopia. It is amazing to have the possibility to demonstrate in a clear manner the outcome of this surgery. I decided to show this picture to enhance the resolution of MS-39. Please see how corneal layers are incredibly easy to be detected, starting from epithelium, then we have the recipient Bowman membrane and the Bowman layer of the donor. Here we have another case in which the resolution matters. This is a disc surgery in which anterior segment OCT was crucial to detect a central detachment, demonstrating that chamflu technology sometimes is not enough for a correct disc follow-up. MS-39 can support the clinical assessment of lamellar surgeries measuring graft thickness, letting you appreciate the graft adherence, and in general, providing you the opportunity to do the complete post-operative follow-up. Now let me spend a few words regarding MS-39 pupillography module. Many devices allow for a pupil measurement, but just a few allow for a light condition variation during the exam. With MS-39, thanks to the possibility to change the brightness of Placido disc, we are able to provide ascotopic, mesopic, and photopic data of the pupil diameter. This is the pupillography acquisition window. The toolbar located in the upper part of the screen allows for Placido disc light adjustment. Starting the pupillography exam from photopic condition is not suggested because the glare could influence the dilatation of the pupil in mesopic and in scotopic condition. That's why by default in the device is preselected the modality scotopic. The results are organized in this comprehensive report. Down right, it is possible to read the scotopic, mesopic, and photopic values, and in the center of the display is shown the en-face image of the eye. The Cartesian coordinates are centrated in the pupil reflex. The yellow cross represents the geometrical center of the pupil. In dynamic exam, it is also possible to appreciate the pupil offset. In MS-39, the analysis of tear film is performed thanks to the reflection of the Placido rings on the ocular surface. In a stable tear film, the keratoscopy image will not undergo any variation for at least 10 seconds. In eyes with a poor tear film stability, the edge of the rings in keratoscopy will get discontinued and Phoenix software will notify in real time a tear breakup. The acquisition consists in a video that starts after a double blinking of the patient, and it is stopped when the patient blinks again or after a preset time. The non-invasive breakup time report consists in 4 displays in which we can appreciate the video keratoscopy up left, the image stream where the green areas represent the wet zones and the red areas the dry zones. In the lower part is displayed the breakup map. Here we can read the breakup time ring by ring. And finally, down right, we show a chart that describes the percentual of dry zones as function of the time. MS-39 is also able to measure lens thickness. This data could be useful in some IOL power calculation formulas, like the Olsen one, for example. Getting lens biometry is fast and easy. It is necessary to focus the anterior surface of the lens in the green box and align the corneal reflex in the display below. With one click, the 090 sections are automatically acquired. In the post-analysis, we are able to provide the lens thickness, aqueous depth, and thanks to the simulation of the lens shape, we can provide also the estimated location of the lens equator. Last but not least, the topography module of MS-39. As mentioned at the beginning, topography data are obtained combining Placido disk and spectral domain OCT technology. Placido disk allows for a direct measurement of anterior curvatures, elevations, and refractive power, but it is not able to provide posterior data, and its coverage is sometimes limited by eyelashes and nose shadows. Spectral domain OCT provides an high-resolution analysis of the entire anterior segment. So the combination of these two technologies give us the highest resolution and the highest accuracy for the analysis of all the surfaces. Here I'm showing anterior segment topography acquisition. For the centration, it is necessary to align the center of keratoscopy with the white cross in the upper display, and in the lower display the corneal vertex, that is indicated by the red dot, have to stay in the green box. MS-39 provides 3 different modalities. The first is useful to have an overall analysis of the anterior segment because it acquires 25 meridians with a coverage of 16 mm. The second is able to get higher the resolution and allows to acquire 12 meridians. The third allows to get the highest resolution, performing the acquisition of 12 meridians with a coverage of 10 mm. The analysis of the anterior corneal surface can be performed thanks to 3 different curvature maps: sagittal, tangential, and Gaussian. Sagittal was the first algorithm developed for corneal topography. This representation is good to analyze the central part of the cornea, but it loses efficiency in the periphery where the cornea gets flatter and flatter. Tangential algorithm was developed to solve this issue, and it is accurate in the center as well as in the periphery. Gaussian map analyzes curvatures in a different way with respect to the maps just described, because it gives the curvature of every point belonging to the cornea as geometric mean of the 2 main meridians passing from the point. The benefits of this kind of representation will be explained well by Francesco in the next speech. MS-39 provides also the anterior elevation map that expresses the elevation of every point belonging to the cornea with respect to a reference surface, and the refractive power map that shows anterior corneal power calculated thanks to the ray tracing. The same representation are available also for posterior surface of cornea. MS-39 allow also for a complete analysis of corneal layers, providing the overall corneal thickness map as well as the partial epithelial and stromal thickness map. The knowledge of both anterior and posterior surfaces of cornea allow us to provide the total refractive power map. A map of anterior chamber depth is also included. All the maps previously mentioned are organized in several summaries. Zernike summary allows for a complete study of corneal aberrations. We can consider just anterior, just posterior, or both corneal surfaces. The display will show in the upper zone the optical path difference and the eye order aberration. In the lower zone, the saddle aberration and the radial orders. The same information are available also for the epithelial layer. Glaucoma summary displays the anterior chamber depth map, corneal thickness map, and up to 25 anterior segment OCT sections that are useful to analyze the anterior chamber angle. The IOP value provided by a Goldman tonometer can be adjusted thanks to the knowledge of corneal thickness according to several reference studies. For LASIK and SMILE refractive surgery, we developed a dedicated display with the collaboration of Dan Reinstein. Here, it is possible to evaluate the regularity of the cap or the flap. The summary of intrastromal corneal rings is used to monitor corneal thickness in the area of the implant and, at the same time, provide a printable summary depicting the main topographic maps which are useful for this type of surgery. In order to get this information, the user has to enter all the rings data provided by the manufacturer nomogram, so the software will show downright the corneal thickness in correspondence of the tunnel. MS-39 includes also an IOL power calculation software. The method used here is not based on synthetic analyzed parameter like SYNK, but considers the measurement of the entire anterior segment obtained with MS-39, like anterior and posterior corneal curvature, total corneal power, anterior chamber depth. Collecting all this data, we are able to estimate the predicted position of the IOL and to create a three-dimensional model of the eye in which it is possible to apply a ray tracing procedure according with Snell and law for every surface of the eye. Thanks to this method and thanks to the knowledge of ocular axial length provided by an external biometer, the IOL calculation is performed without using approximation or constants. One of the greatest benefits of this procedure is the customization of the power calculation. Using the typical IOL calculation formulas, two eyes of two different persons with the same SYNK deserve the same IOL. But if the SYNK is equal, it does not mean that the morphology of the eye is the same. Only considering all the anterior segment parameters as we do, we can customize the IOL for the eye of every patient. Ray tracing offers several advantages with respect to traditional thin lens formulas, also in after refractive treatment patients. It does not rely on a fixed ratio between the anterior and the posterior corneal curvature, but instead is based on the curvature measurements of both surfaces. It does not need any historical information, for example, the amount of myopia corrected by the refractive treatment or the pre-op topographic map. It does not estimate the IOL position from corneal radius. It does not perform paraxial calculation, but instead takes into consideration eye order aberration, which can be relevant in eyes with RK. It directly performs calculation for the cylinder of the IOL in case of corneal astigmatism. MS-39 provides also a sophisticated keratoconus screening that my colleague Francesco is going to describe. Thank you for your attention.
Before we start, I would like to thank all of you attending this meeting today, Jeremy for organizing it, and the speakers for dedicating us some precious time. But at the same time, I would like to offer my thanks to all the clinics who have worked with us on this project. As you probably know, we develop our products taking into account suggestions from several key opinion leaders, and I would like to acknowledge them all, but for this topic in particular, a special thank is due to Dr. Alal Donosori, Dr. Alio, and Dr. Balez, who review with me thousands of cases for the classifier, Dr. Macaluso for his important suggestions, and Dr. Dan Reinstein for his great work on epithelial thickness maps. If we read one of the many possible definitions of keratoconus, we have that keratoconus is a bilateral ectatic disease that is characterized by progressive thinning and protrusion of the cornea. First of all, we have that keratoconus is defined as a protrusion, and what the word protrusion recalls to us? It recalls positive elevation and increasing curvature. Then we have the word thinning. This means that we have to check to the thickness map. And finally, we have the word bilateral, and this means that it's worth to evaluate OD and OS together. Starting from the curvature changes, on the left-hand side of the screen on top, we have information about the curvature anterior and posterior. You can choose between tangential and sagittal curvature according to your own preferences. All of you are used to sagittal and tangential curvature, as these curvatures are very well known and used from the very beginning of corneal topography. Sagittal curvature is defined as the distance between a point and the keratoscopic axis along the direction normal to the point itself. Tangential curvature is defined as the radius of the obscurating circle along the corneal meridian. As you can see, these two definitions concern the curvature along the green direction. Now my question, is it fair, especially when we evaluate an ectasia, to consider the meridional component, the green one, solely, neglecting the transversal one, the red one? The Gaussian curvature or the Gauss curvature of a surface at a point is defined as the geometrical mean of the principal curvatures, K1 and K2 at a given point. Gaussian curvature, unlike tangential and sagittal, is calculated considering each direction and thus doesn't neglect any component. Another interesting feature of this map is that as Gaussian curvature averages flattest and steepest direction for each point, it hides astigmatism of the surface, revealing only the high-order deformations. I would like to show you a couple of reasons why the Gaussian curvature is so promising in this field. As you know, key marks, both anterior and posterior, have long been accused not to be reliable or repeatable. The definition of key marks is really simple. They are simply defined as the steepest point of the curvature on the area of the analysis. If you look at the two maps and you focus on the steepest points, would you be comfortable with the location of the posterior key marks? Actually, I would expect something more similar to the anterior one, located inferiorly at 2 mm from the corneal vertex. Let's now look at the same cornea as a Gaussian curvature. As you can see now, the map is completely different, the central bow tie disappears, and the location of the posterior key marks back in place exactly in the same location of the anterior one. How it's supposed to be. In this slide, I would like to talk about nasal cones. Here we have a comparison between right and left eye of the same patient with a clear diagnosis of keratoconus. However, strangely, the two of them looks nasally displaced and not temporally, how we would expect. We had this impression looking at the tangential and the sagittal map, but what if we use Gaussian map instead? In this case, the location of the cone and the key marks appear now exactly where we expect to be, temporally displaced, and coincident with the most elevated point. The interesting reason why the tangential and sagittal map show a nasal ectasia is that the previous corneal astigmatism mixed up with a keratoconus coma, giving us the impression of a displaced bulging area. It is now time to talk about elevation map in our keratoconus screening. In keratoconus, the best fit conic surface doesn't mean a good fit surface. The difference is never zero, and the bulging area always lies above the reference. Front and back elevation maps are displayed with respect to an aspiratoric best fit reference with a physiological sphericity not to hide the central cones. The best fit diameter is set to 8 mm, and being an aspiratoric surface, we hide the contribution of the astigmatism in this way that tend to mask the ectasia mainly in early stages, and we emphasize the irregularities. We already announced the importance of the corneal thickness for our keratoconus detection. It's time to show the components of our screening related to this feature. On top, we have the corneal thickness and its path deviation. Below, we have the applanated-like anamorphic corneal display and the thickness increase chart. Let's review them in details. The corneal thickness map doesn't need any explanation because it is already known and widely used from all of you. But the path deviation instead deserves a few more words. The convex shape of a normal cornea can hide, in early cases, the thinning of a keratoconus. For this reason, it is a good idea to remove this bias before we analyze the corneal thickness. The tool that allows us achieving is the path deviation map. The path deviation map represents for each point P the value of the deviation from the average of the healthy population of the value itself in terms of standard deviation of the normality. Even if the definition looks a bit complex, all of you already use this concept because it's the same that you already use evaluating a visual field. Let's make a simple numerical example to make this concept clear. Let's imagine to have at the point xy a corneal thickness of 400 micron, and in the same location a statistic for the healthy population of 500 with a standard deviation of 50. In this case, we're going to have minus 100 divided by 50 equal minus 2 standard deviation. The percentage thickness increase is derived from Renato Ambrosio studies. First of all, we have to define the CTSP, the corneal thickness spatial profile, as the average of the thickness value along concentric ring centered on the thinness point, TP. The percentage increase of CTSP in respect to TP defines the famous Renato chart. The line around the main one represents the normality percentiles. Last but not least, we include stromal and epithelial thickness and their path deviation maps in our keratoconus screening. Dr. Wolfe and Dr. Barrio after me will explain the clinical implication of these in details. I'll show just a couple of slides to briefly introduce the concept. In this paper, Dan Reinstein claimed that the cornea epithelium has the ability to alter its thickness profile to reestablish a smooth, symmetrical optical surface and either partially or totally mask the presence of an irregular stromal surface from front surface corneal topography. As an example of this, if we look to an OCT section of a keratoconus eye in the direction of the ectasia, we obtain a clearly asymmetrical shape. However, the deformation is small if compared to the sagitta of the cornea, and we need somehow to enhance this asymmetry. For this reason, we define a so-called anamorphic, aplanated-like display. In this display, the anterior corneal surface is taken as a reference and straightened to the horizontal direction, like if the cornea was applanated. This display is anamorphic in the sense that the X scaling is different from the Y scaling. So the overall width of this image is 10 mm, when the overall height is less than 1 mm. We have done this choice simply to emphasize the deformation along the optical axis. You can immediately see, for instance, the asymmetry of the corneal thickness in respect to the dotted line. The dotted line is supposed to be a normal symmetrical corneal thickness. Between the two yellow lines, you can see clearly the epithelium, and it's pretty easy to see that in the center the epithelium is thinner and it goes thicker just moving from the center to the periphery. If you can imagine to rotate this pattern along the optical axis, the z-axis, you will obtain the typical donut pattern described by Dan Reinstein in his papers. Let's talk now about indexes. Indexes are for us the way to move from a quantitative analysis to a qualitative analysis of the cornea. On the right of each panel, we have a vertical strip reporting the indexes that we provide. Let's now give a look to them together and explain the meaning of each one. The very first part describes the reciprocal location of the notable points and their value. Then we have a section for indexes that are curvature-based, elevation-based, thickness-based, and epithelial thickness-based. Finally, we have a classification, and in case of keratoconus, a section with a morphological description of the cone. The notable point charts display on the screen the value and the mutual location of minimum epithelial thickness point, minimum stromal thickness point, minimum thickness point, anterior and posterior steepest point, and anterior and posterior most elevated point. We can also define the very center of this point as the center of the keratoconus. As you know, the coincidence of those points is a very strong sign of keratoconus, what Vinci Guerra defined red on red. This makes us define the NPS index, notable point spread, as the average distance of each point from the keratoconus body center. The smaller this number is, the more coincident the points are, the more likely the eye will be a keratoconus. If we talk about curvature-based indexes, SIF and SIB stand for Symmetry Index of Anterior and Posterior Surface, respectively. Those indexes are defined as a difference on the Gaussian curvature of 3 mm diameter circular zone having center 1 mm.5 far from the corneal vertex and place 8 degrees temporally respect to the vertical meridian. In the same way, the central surrounding index CSI, F and B are defined as different on the Gaussian map between the 3 mm central zone and the 3 mm annulus around it. For all those indexes, the limits of healthy population are shown as bars. Ectasia index of the front and back surface allow the assessment of an ectasia by analyzing the zedic decomposition of the elevation. As a general rule, the term providing a good separation between normals and cone are considered, like coma or spherical aberration. Those indexes are probably the most sensitive in the discrimination between normals and keratoconus. Talking about corneal thickness base indexes, the simplest corneal thickness base index is the minimum value. However, this index is not very predictive of keratoconus in early stage. More predictive is the TSI and the TI max. The first one is defined as the difference of the thickness of 3 mm diameter circular zone having the center 1.5 mm far from the corneal vertex and placed 8 degrees temporally respect to the vertical meridian. The second one is defined as the maximum displacement between the percentage increase and its normality limit. In a similar way, the epithelium TI is defined as the maximum percentage increase from the thinnest point of the epithelial thickness to the periphery. Classification. This information haven't been published yet. I'm waiting for some quiet time to put my effort in writing the paper together with doctors who helped me. All those indexes that we have been describing so far are being used to feed a multi-layer perceptual neural network with backpropagation learning algorithm. As a first step, a database containing 6,271 eyes has been classified by Dr. Aldonosori, Dr. Del Barrio, and Dr. Balez into 5 groups: normal, keratoconus, borderline cases, myopic post-op, and abnormal eyes, with a criteria of 2 votes out of 3. The 3 doctors were really conservative in the classification, and this approach gave, on one hand, the sensitivity of the network, but on the other hand, some headaches to us to develop such sensitive network. This work resulted on a group of 2,565 normal eyes, 1,459 keratoconus, 1,463 myopic post-op, 584 abnormal, and 205 borderline cases. The full dataset have then been randomly divided into 2 main datasets, training dataset and validation dataset. The first one was to teach to the network how to classify, and the second one to test the network and its performances. For this splitting, we chose the rule of the 70% for the training and 30% for the testing. As you can see in this slide, the results are actually pretty good, mainly if you consider the challenging task to pick up cases which is such an early stage. Analyzing the keratoconus class, for instance, we have that only the 0.9% of cases were classified as abnormal and the same value as a borderline. I would define those as a minor mistakes because those kind of classification are not dangerous for the patient. The 98.2% on the other hand has been correctly classified. Looking at the normal population, the big majority of the eye, the 98.6, has been classified as normal, and only the 0.5% has been classified erroneously as borderline cases. The borderline, finally, is the most challenging group, and we have to declare a failure rate of the 10% that is compatible with the uncertainty of the classification itself, because we have for a long time discussed on some cases, and it's been very hard to find an agreement of how to classify some cases. So this result is a great result if we compare it with the uncertainty of the classification itself. By the way, I want to remember that the classification system is not and doesn't want to be an auto-diagnosis, but is just intended to provide the compatibility of the case with one of the above defined classes. The final decision and the final diagnosis is always up to the clinician who knows the patient clinical situation. As we say before, keratoconus is a bilateral disease, and is always a good option to have to take into account simultaneously the right and the left eye. For this reason, in the first tab you have the information about the right, in the second tab you have information about the left, and in the final summary you have the two eyes together, and you can make a comparison of the two, and you can also make a decision on the classification based on the fellow eye. Enantiomorphism. As you probably know, enantiomorphism is the similarity of the right eye with a mirror replica of the left eye. So ideally, in a normal eye, if I subtract the right eye and the mirror version of the left, the difference is supposed to be 0. This is not true for keratoconus, that is not supposed to develop in the same place and at the same time in the right and in the left. So evaluating the difference of in enantiomorphism, so of the right and the left eye, is a very powerful way of detecting keratoconus. In this panel, that is in the same summary of keratoconus, you can make those kind of evaluation for Gaussian front curvature, Gaussian back curvature, front and back elevation, corneal thickness, and epithelial thickness. Finally, we have a tool for evaluating the follow-up of a keratoconus, evaluating aspect of front, back curvature and elevation and corneal thickness over time. So you can select as many exams you like, as many acquisition you like. Those images, those indexes are placed on a chart, and you can evaluate the trend of those values and try to understand if we have a stable situation or if the keratoconus is getting worse. Thank you for your kind attention, and now Dr. Barrio and Dr. Wolfe will discuss about the clinical part.
Well, hello. Hello. You can hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, great. Oh, great. I have a question here. It's for you, Simon, from Jessica Bellier. And she says, during the first presentation, I saw the 360 degrees pattern scan in as an OCT section, but I don't think I have it on my MS-39. How can I get it?
Yeah, good morning, sorry, good afternoon, I would say, everybody, and thank you for attending this webinar, and thank you, Jessica, for your question. Yeah, you're right. That pattern is now not available on MS-39. This will be a future announcement, and it will be able to acquire 18 sections in the 360 degrees in high resolution. This is the key point, because actually you can get during topography 25 anterior OCT section, but in raw quality. So it will be available soon, and it will be useful, as I said, for lamellar transplantation, but also, for example, if you want to check the anterior chamber angle aperture or closure, of course. Also, the new follow-up of Keratoconus Screening will be ready soon, and it will be included also in the new software release.
I found that I used to ask the same question of Francesco and others when I'm getting things and when they're happening. Then I go home and I have a look at the MS-39 and I click through it and pleasantly surprised that I actually have them. And there's so much on the machine. It's very hard to, at least for me, and I've had it for 2 years, to get my head around everything that's available. It's a wonderful machine. I remember saying to Francesco once at a conference, I said, Dan Reinstein's got epithelial refraction on his and I want it on mine. And he said, oh, maybe. And then I went home and found I already had it. And so there are lots of things, there are lots of things on it. I think that, you know, that keratoconus plotting thing is absolutely required. I saw a great talk by Dr. Seiler, who talked about what's statistically significant, what significant differences there are relating to the MS-39. They're different to other devices because of the greater accuracy, what the minimum change in, say, thickness or curvature is that you accept as real progression. Is this addressed in the module?
Could you please repeat the question? Because
yes,
yeah.
Yes, I saw a wonderful talk by
with
Dr. Seiler,
yeah,
about statistically what the minimum change in the indices are to be a significant change. And of course, it's going to be less with the MS-39 than, say, a Pentacam because of increased precision. These figures are included in the module?
Yeah, let's say, first of all, we have to discriminate between what kind of index we are talking about. Because, for instance, we should increase the accuracy of the cornea thickness, because moving from shampoo technology to OCT technology, we have a significant difference in terms of quality of the measurements. So, for instance, everything is related to the pachymetry, and it is also related to the posterior elevation or posterior curvature is actually much better in OCT than in shampoo cameras. We have also a difference in my opinion, on the anterior indexes, even if they are derived from Placido. You know, Placido is more sensitive, but it's also more noisy than shampoo imaging, because in Placido you are able to detect small changes, but at the same time you have more noises on the acquisition, and the acquisition are less repeatable. Something that we have to do on our side is to publish all our findings to give you an idea of the repeatability of each index, mostly for Keratoconus screening, just to give an idea of what is significant, evaluating the trend of each index. And this is also important if you are trying to evaluate the progression of a cone. So the last slide of presentation, because if the variation of an index is greater
greater than the repeatability of the index itself, maybe you have a progression, so you have to pay attention in this case.
I see. I have no further questions from the audience, but I think there might be some confusion in people's minds about elevation. Now, in the keratoconus module, you use a term elevation versus normality.
Yeah.
Other places, you generally use an aspherotoric fit and quote an elevation number, like the pentacam, except that's a spherical fit. Do you use that number as a index of keratoconus? What's the difference? Like in the pentacam, they have notional ideas of how much elevation in a spherical fit is abnormal. In fact, it's nearly the basis of it all.
Yeah, maybe I can clarify this point. In our screening, what we do actually is pretty simple. We try, first of all, to compare our elevation maps or our heat map with what we think is a normal eye. And the question is, how could you describe a normal eye? In our opinion, a normal eye is a best fit eye, because you can have steep or flat normal eyes. So this is not something that determine a cone or not, in my opinion. For sure, keratoconus will induce astigmatism, but not all toric eyes are keratoconic. So we want to remove also the information on the toricity from the keratoconus screening. But what we want to preserve is the information about the asphericity. So for our vision, what we have to remove from our actual elevation is an aspherotoric surface with best fit radius, best fit toricity, but fixed asphericity, so the asphericity of a normal eye. Just because this reference is the most similar to a normal eye, so a normal eye is not spherical. You want to remove something that is like normal eye. If you remove a normal eye from elevation, in a normal case, we will have 0. So no difference between our elevation and the reference. Everything is left in an eye at this point is aberration and is high order aberration. So it's something that we have to look at evaluating the screening. I also want to point your attention on the fact that we are using a fixed asphericity. This because if we allow the asphericity to be 100%, if the asphericity, if we don't fix the asphericity, we risk to include into the reference surface the central cones. Let's imagine, for instance, that we are using a fully best fit aspherotoric eye, and you are checking an eye with a central cone. Big part of this ectasia will be hidden from the asphericity in the reference surface. So we want in central cones the central area to be highlighted as a different with surface. So in Pentacam, I think they have a different approach. They divide the area into main areas, the central area and the periphery, and they make two different best fits, evaluating the difference between the first and second one. Once we have our difference in our keratoconus, we divide each component by mean of Zernike decomposition, and we evaluate the term that has the most capability of separating normals and cones. So, for instance, if we analyze the residual after our best fit removal on a keratoconic eyes respect to a normal eye, we will see that, for instance, coma and spherical aberration are much more present in keratoconus than in normal eyes. So based on this, we define an index that takes into account this difference, and the EI front and EI back collect all the information to provide something that is able to predict the ectasia and to classify the cone.
Thank you very much. I have no further questions.
I don't think so. Maybe you can go ahead with the presentation. Yeah. Right.
Okay, now I'm going to introduce Dr. Wolfe's presentation. Thank you again for your time dedicated to the event. I don't know if you can see the screen.
Yes.
Okay.
Well, hi, I'm Rick Wolfe. I'm a refractive surgeon from Melbourne, and I've had the MS-39 for a year and a half now, and I'd love to talk about it. It has a Placido system with illuminated rings and data points of 30,000 anteriorly, but it also looks at the posterior cornea as well with 25,000 points. It has a topographic coverage of 10 millimeters. The OCT is a spectral domain OCT with a fairly short wavelength of 850. That means that the actual resolution is actually 3.5 microns. So it allows actual imaging of the epithelium. And it allows a 16 millimeter diameter vision. So one Placido video keratographic image is fused with a series of OCT scans. The details how they do it are proprietary. But the important thing to remember is that Placido maps actually measure the curvature directly, whereas Scheinpflug takes height data and derives the curvature from that. It's not as precise. Thickness data is more accurate anterior segmented imaging is possible, and avoids the reflections of Scheinpflug. And on Scheinpflug, a little bit of scarring will show the cornea particularly thin and mess it up. And you always wondered why older people didn't do so well with Arcus. It messes up the picture too, whereas OCT is better. So what do we do with it? Well, two big things in a refractive surgery clinic are checking keratoconus and checking for dry eye. They're big LASIK things. Subclinical keratoconus, though, very subjective in its detection. There's a lot of inter-observer error. We use multiple criteria. But what would be ideal would be a single test that has a high sensitivity and specificity in classifying normal versus suspect keratoconus. A high sensitivity to avoid operating on vulnerable eyes, and a high specificity so we've got few false positives, so surgery can be offered to more people. Now this is a support vector machine artificial intelligence for the detection of keratoconus that was on the last system. It was installed on the CSO, Sirius, a Scheinpflug image, a Scheinpflug camera, and it was on the MS-39 version 3.7. It actually doesn't exist anymore, so why am I talking about it? Well, it led up to the current system, and we understand how well it works. It used symmetry indices, elevation indices, and thickness indices. And it was compared against these eyes to see how good a classifier it was. And this is a confusion matrix. Subclinical keratoconus versus normal, sensitivity 92%, specificity 97.7%. That's in picking subclinical keratoconus from normal. And you think, well, sensitivity not so good. But think about this. 8 of the misclassified cases were misclassified as keratoconus. So that really puts the sensitivity back to 97% in picking abnormal eyes not to operate on. How does Pentacam compare? Well, the bad D value is something that a lot of us use. Renato Ambrosio pointed out that a 1.22 cutoff for the bad D gave 93.6% sensitivity, 94.6% specificity for subclinical keratoconus. So the new classifier was needed because of the superior diagnostic ability of the MS-39. It takes in 4 new things: Gaussian curvature, epithelial thinning, the Ambrosio percentage thickness affected, percentage thickness increase, and the anamorphic corner image. Symmetry and curvature indices are different. Elevation indices are different as an aspherotoric fit over 8 millimeters. Instead of like pentacam measuring a distance, it's expressed as Zernike polynomials. Ectasio indices look at the Zernike coefficients that maximally distinguish normal from ectatic. And thickness indices, and this bottom one is most important, a bit of a game changer, epithelial thickness. This is how it works. Francesco told me this. It didn't help me very much, but it might help you. So this is the keratoconus module. Here we have tangential anterior curvature, tangential posterior curvature, Gaussian anterior curvature, Gaussian posterior curvature, anterior elevation, posterior elevation, epithelial thickness, and stromal and corneal thickness. This is the anamorphic image. It's been flattened on the top and stretched out vertically to take advantage of the axial resolution. And I can show you a few things. The Ambrosio percentage thickness increase has been included. And this is the classifier. We have a look first at what's called the notable point spread. So these points, epithelial thickness, stromal thickness, corneal thickness, Kmax anterior, Kmax posterior, elevation anterior, elevation posterior. If all of these points are close, it's more likely to be keratoconus. So in this case, the notable point spread is very small, and it's classified as keratoconus. These are the symmetry, ectasia, and thickness indices. And this is the decision it made. In this case, keratoconus. It gives the Alfonso phenotype, in this case a snowman, and it gives the ABCD grading of Bellin. So what's a Gaussian curvature? Well, it's a geometric mean of the maximum and minimum curvature at one point on a surface. It's like there was no astigmatism. It gives more sensitive representation of the curvature. So here's a case. You see here, this looks like the Kmax, but it's not actually here for the anterior surface. It's further temporally in this eye where you might expect it to be, and it's in much the same place as the Gaussian posterior curvature, as the anterior elevation, and as the posterior elevation. So the notable point spread is small, and the elevation indices are positive. This is keratoconus, but what else is positive is the epithelial thickness. And have a look, here's the epithelial thickness. It's thinned over the cone. And this is very suggestive of keratoconus. Why? The epithelium in keratoconus masks the cone partly. It's why we can do PTK on a cone to impose the epithelial surface on the stromal surface and help. Here's an interesting case. This, by every measure, pentacam, shine fluid, is a normal eye. Maybe the Q value is a bit low at -0.46, but everything called it normal until you look at the corneal epithelium, and it's thin centrally. This could have a normal other eye and still be subclinical keratoconus. In fact, the other eye was keratoconus. And this is the other eye. And here we see the epithelial thinning. The other thing here is the percentage thickness increase falls well below the other percentages. And the anamorphic image, you can actually see the keratoconus on the right side there. You can't really see the epithelial thinning, but the anterior and posterior surface abnormalities are put on the posterior surface and magnifies it. Epithelial simulating keratoconus. Here's a case of thickening of the epithelium below. This is a contact lens wearer, but it also looks a little bit like keratoconus and it's been classified as borderline. And here we see the Gaussian curvature of both eyes a bit lower, and the posterior Gaussian curvature doesn't correspond. The anterior elevation shows this, but the stromal elevation, that is the elevation without the epithelium, is quite normal. This isn't keratoconus, this is corneal warpage. The enantiomorphism page is a little hard for me to understand, but the left eyes are reversed and subtracted. So if eyes are mirror images of each other, as in normality, then they'll just look green. If there's keratoconus, there'll be asymmetry, and the asymmetry will show up in the green maps. I think that supports it not being keratoconus. Now, I count about 36 sort of displays on the machine, and I haven't used them all. There's so much to it. Here's how I've used the maps in one case. This is a PIK that I did, -5 and -2, and it didn't turn out particularly well. Here's the beautiful tangential anterior curvature map, very detailed. And there is no astigmatism here, absolutely none. How do I know? Because here's the Gaussian curvature, it looks the same, no astigmatism. But what you do see is 5 diopters difference within the pupil. This is coma. And here's the result, +2 and a -2 by 40, no astigmatism, but it's coma simulating astigmatism. And we can look at the coma on one of the maps, and it has very significant coma. And the C7 and C8 coefficients support oblique coma. And the quality of vision, the point spread function's a bit spread out, the Strel ratio is down at 0.13. There is some effect on visual quality. So what we do? We did a planar topographic guided ablation in this case, and we got an excellent result by treating no astigmatism, as the astigmatism was really coma. And the epithelial thickness pre and post enhancement, the epithelium thinned and became more regular because it was a more regular surface. What about the epithelium? How is that helpful to us? Well, I don't know that we can really do refractive surgery anymore at their very best without knowing what the epithelium is doing. It might be hiding keratoconus. It might be thinning as a sign of keratoconus. There might be lack of thinning, making keratoconus less likely. Epithelium may be simulating keratoconus. Transepithelial PRK. How thick do you make the PTK? What about the LASIK flap? How thick do you make the flap to make sure it has stroma with it? And PTK with topography guided PRK, like the Athens protocol for keratoconus, how much PTK do? You have to get rid of all the epithelium. Understanding compensatory mechanisms and avoiding apex syndrome in hyperopia treatment. I'm sure there's lots more. They're just the ones that I thought of that I've had something to do with. So the mean thickness is 53.4, but with a significant range Dan Reinstein found. Here's one of my cases, virgin eye, 76 microns. Here's one I saw online, so it must be real, 121 microns. Now, you could do 110 LASIK flap and not reach the stroma on this, or do a 50 PTK and 5 diopters and still not reach the stroma. That's why you need to know the epithelial thickness before doing any of these procedures. And after LASIK and PRK, it's thickened. But look at this case. After 5 diopters of PRK, half a diopter of regression in the left eye due to 12 microns of epithelial thickening, you could treat this eye with 50 microns of PTK and not even reach the stroma if you didn't know about it. This is what happens really quickly. This is a hyperopic case. And you see a one-day epithelial map of a hyperopic case, and already there's been shifting of cells and hyperplasia, and at 3 months it's a great deal more. Here's a case that came in to see me, a slow recovery, performed on the Schwind laser. His glasses showed this, so presumably this is what was treated. But at 4 weeks post-TPRK, here's the refraction. There's 7 diopters with the rule change. Now, that could have been way too much cylinder put into the laser. Who knows what happened? I do know what happened, because here's the epithelial refraction. There's the 7 diopters. Abnormal epithelial healing. We were able to reassure this guy nothing permanent had happened, and he got better over for a period of a month or 2. Epithelial thinning, I don't know, my picture there, it says ortho K. We see epithelial thinning in orthokeratology, and that's the reason that it works. Around the outside is some epithelial thickening, and it's proposed that this peripheral hyperopic defocus that would otherwise be caused by a perfect optics is reduced. There may be some value in myopia control. So these beautiful tangential anterior curvature maps, very detailed. You can see how irregular all of this is. This is epithelial basement membrane dystrophy, obviously. But if we looked at a corneal map, an epithelial map, it amplifies it enormously. And this is interesting. Here's the HD-OCT, and you can see that within the epithelium, abnormal basement membrane and cellular growth. Now, Francesco Coronis once said, the only thing that scares me about LASIK is DLK. And I had a really bad case 24 years ago, and the next one was in June 19. The next one was the same day, and the next one was the day after. It was pretty scary, and we haven't seen it since. Hard to know what the factors are. That's a story for another day. And here we see the typical mud crack of the CTK. And here's the topography. It looks terrible. But you know, within 6 months, it was nearly better. How does that happen? Here's the anterior elevation. It actually doesn't look too bad. But the stromal elevation map shows the thinning. And this is the epithelial plug that makes these people better. This epithelium is over 100 microns thick. And here's the HD-OCT. And you can see here the flap's almost totally eroded. The stroma underlying is thinner and opaque. And the epithelium is very thick, and it all looks beautiful. There's maybe evidence that there actually is a God. Apex syndrome, that a 4-diopter hyperopic treatment is associated in this case with 7 microns of central epithelial thinning. So if you make the cornea too steep, you can get epithelial breakdown and scarring, just like you can in keratoconus. So it was assumed that steep Ks are responsible for epithelial breakdown at the apex of a hyperopic ablation, but Dan Reinstein said that curvature was just a proxy for that risk, and it's the epithelial thickness that limits the hyperopic treatment. And he said that the apex needs to be 28 microns because there's unpublished work that shows it's dangerous at 21, and the thinning occurs at 2 microns per diopter, so you can calculate, according to him, how much hyperopia you can induce on a particular corneum. And you'll see here, this had 4 diopters of LASIK and nearly 8 diopters of central thinning. Dry eye and LASIK. Now, this was published in Journal of Cataract Refractive Surgery, and I'm sure these people had a lot of fun producing this chart, but it's just totally unworkable. I mean, if we want to get patients through the LASIK clinic, we really have to have a really good test that's very, very sensitive for dry. Even if it throws up a few false positives, we can deal with those because we want them to get to a visit through the surgery as efficiently as possible. So this is really important. We do a speed test, but also a non-invasive tear film breakup time. And I think it's one of the most sensitive tests for dry eye. I think we see a few false positives, but that's not such a problem. It's done on the MS-39. This is a patient I saw recently, had a lot of tear film breakup, 2.5 seconds. 10 seconds is thought to be about normal. I treated him with IPL and drops, and after a month or so, he was up to 11.5. We did LASIK, and everything was fine. HD-OCT images are useful for many things. In refractive surgery, they're useful for investigating what's gone on in the past. Now, this guy here has had LASIK and PRK. And if you take the green marker and find the flap, and you can always find the interface, put it here, it tells you the flap thickness, tells you the residual stromal bed. But have a look at this. Have a look at the roughness of the layer of the stroma, how rough it is. This is a Summit laser PRK from 1991, I think. You can see Bowman's membrane finishes here. It's a very small zone. And here's the thickened epithelium that you'd expect. Now, sometimes people don't know what procedure they had. Here's an OCT with a magnifier. This patient's had LASIK. Firstly, you can see the flap. But secondly, the bilaminar structure of Bowman's membrane is visible. This patient has had PRK because the bilaminar structure is no longer there. Bowman's membrane is gone. Intracorneal ring segments. One of the difficulties with intracorneal ring segments is knowing that the tunnel passes through cornea of adequate thickness. And this works it all out for you. So you tell it what you want to put in, tell it the bisecting line. Do you want it in the chromatic axis or the flat axis or whatever? And it'll go through the maximum and minimum corneal thicknesses at 100% and whatever percentage you want to put the intracorneal ring segment in. In this case, we've chosen 70%. And you can look at the rings afterwards and have a look at this. How beautiful is that? Look at that picture. The thickening of the epithelium inside the rings, as Dan Reinstein described quite a long time ago. Now, ICL, I put in ICLs. And the problem is getting the sizing right. It's absolutely critical to a safe procedure. And using the white to white probably isn't accurate enough. Here's some numbers here that are very useful. The scleral spur to scleral spur and the lens rise. You only need these two numbers. The scleral spur to scleral spur, sometimes called the anterior chamber width, that's a straight line. It's just distorted by the distortion in the OCT. And this is called the crystalline lens rise. The Nakamura formula, of which there are several, and the last one proposed by Eric Mertens, is what we use. It's fairly simple. And we've got it set up on an Excel spreadsheet, and it just gives us the optimal ICL size. And we choose the ICL from the table below. And here's this one that we just did. We can actually measure easily measure the volt, 492, 478. All looks really nice. You know, when you've got very narrow volts on ICLs, and you look at the slit lamp, it can be very difficult to tell whether it's touching or whether it's 100 microns apart, I find. This one's got to be watched carefully. It's been in for a long time. So Eric Mertens finds that it's more practical than UBM. There's variability and it's user dependent. More accurate volt than UBM, complete anterior segment evaluation, dynamic evaluation of the lens volt. And this is a great picture. You see as a pupil comes in, the lens volt narrows. You can take these movie OCTs. Pupillometry, that might be important in some cases. And you can measure scotopic, mesopic, and photopic at 0.04 lux, 4 lux, and 50 lux. It all happens very quickly on its own. Just press the button. And up top, you have the Cartesian coordinates of the center of the pupil. IOL prediction. This IOL program uses ray tracing and no formula except Snell's law. The regular paraxial formulas aren't used. So it creates a model eye, knowing the corneal curvatures, the IOL position, the axial length. This sort of measurement might replace paraxial formulas in the future. At the moment, on the difficult cases, I use the Barrett-Toric True K to choose the lens, but also measure with the MS-39. We have a look at prediction errors later and see how good it actually is. Useful numbers. There's a whole lot of useful numbers here. I find one particularly the Gull-Strand ratio of 0.83 posterior to anterior. That's the ratio of the posterior corneal curvature to the anterior corneal curvature, and it's very, very constant along a wide range of Ks. But if it's over 83 or so, they've probably had hyperopic PRK. If it's below 82 or so, they probably had myopic PRK, and that might be helpful to you in IOL power estimation. So in conclusion, I'd say refractive surgery planning is not complete without epithelial maps. The MS-39 provides many functions and makes gathering all the information required simple. Acquisition is achievable even by somebody with little training. And the keratoconus detection and dry eye assessment improve enormously the flow of a busy refractive surgery clinic. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Wolfe, for this very interesting presentation. We have a question from the audience, from Dr. Emsley. He says, thank you for the great presentation, Dr. Wolfe. Please, will you comment on how much you use epithelial thickness for assessment of keratoconus cases before refractive surgeries? And also, how has epithelial thickness increased your treatment rate? Did you include suspect eyes basing your decision on epithelial thickness?
That's a really good question. Look, well, clearly we use epithelial thickness in helping diagnose keratoconus. But the question is whether you can do the other way, whether you can use epithelial thickness to diagnose normality. That is, there's no thinning of the epithelium. And Dan Reinstein wrote a paper in 2009 where he took a lot of cases and that looked like keratoconus but didn't have thinning, and didn't get ectasia. Well, the problem with that is you also see real keratoconus cases that don't have any thinning. Now, I don't know why that is, whether it's just that, because overall in unstable keratoconus, the cornea thickens, whether that corneal epithelium thickens, whether that swamps the epithelial thinning, I don't know what it is, but it's not 100% that if you don't have thinning, you haven't got keratoconus. So I'm not sure that you can operate on more cases just because there's no thinning in a suspect eye. I think you have to look at multiple, it's multimodal. You have to look at all different things.
Okay, thank you.
Does that answer the question?
There was another question. Dr. Wolfe, you run a busy clinic. Does the MS-39 improve the workflow and comfort of patients? Are your team using the MS-39 or only you as you are the surgeon?
We use the MS-39 in every patient. We've slowly dropped off the other topographies. If there's some doubt, I still do a pentacam, but it's become pretty much exclusively. You see, there's one acquisition and so much data. So we do a tear film breakup time, and we take a regular acquisition, and there's so much data to be interpreted. And the beauty is, if everything comes up normally, that's the end of it. Tear film breakup time, normal keratoconus screen, adequate thickness, the patient's straight away to surgery. And there's far less individual decision making that happens.
Okay.
I also have a question. How much value do you give to the quantity of light that you use during the acquisition? For instance, if you use a Scheffler camera, you have this strong blue light that is somehow needed to grab the images. And what is the quality of the acquisition comparing OCT light that is infrared and Scheffler light that is blue light? So can you get more data or better data with OCT, or is more or less comparable?
I think the higher sensitivity of the Placido image gives you more curvature data.
No, I mean the comfort of the acquisition, because by using blue light, sometimes patient is not able to fix or they squeeze the eye. So
Sure.
do you feel this in your daily clinic, or is something that doesn't have a real value for you?
I think the important thing is how quickly the acquisition's made. The Scheinfeld acquisition is quite long. They have to look for quite a while, and you can get faulty images more easily with the Scheinfeld. The acquisition is very quick with the MS-39.
Okay, thank you. Oh, Jorge just joined. Hello, Jorge.
Hi, hello, Francesco. I'm running fast the clinic because I have 2 more patients to see, but I think we have time, no?
Yeah. And then we start with the presentation. So take your time, and you will join us for a discussion.
We have 20 minutes. Okay. I will be there. I will be here already. Okay, with everything on, but I will still keep going.
Okay. Take your time. Bye-bye.
No.
We have another question for Dr. Wolfe. Dr. Gourmet says, thank you for your great presentation. Where did you access Dr. Mertens' formula for ICL calculation? Is it readily available?
Well, the real answer to the question is I asked him, and he told me. The other answer to the question is that it's on a great YouTube video that CSO's put out. You just have to search it, and that's where I actually plagiarized a lot of that ICL stuff directly from Eric. Don't anyone tell him. And but I asked him why his formula is different, and he said he hadn't modified it from the original Nakamura, but it is different. He's currently got 300 patients, and he's got a statistician working on an improved Nakamura formula. But I've used that one, and the one I gave was the one that's on the video, and it's worth watching. You just ask from CSO; they'll tell you, give you the address. It was referenced on the talk there, and have a look at his video. I just reproduced it from there, but it works well.
Okay, good. We have another one. If I understand correctly, fast acquisition means high repeatability.
Well, yes, of course, because the eye doesn't move. The other thing too about the acquisition is it doesn't take a particularly highly trained person to do it. Even I can do it, which is, I usually have optometrists do it, but it's a very quick acquisition and will obviously be more repeatable if the eye won't move.
Okay, thank you. I think we have done.
Yeah. Thanks a lot for
your great presentation and for your availability again. Now I will show you the Dr. Halio presentation. Let me know if you can see the screen.
Hello, I'm Dr. Jorge del Barrio, and many thanks to CSO for inviting me to give this presentation in what is my real first meeting in Australia. That unfortunately I've been forced to do it from Spain, but hopefully in the near future I will be able to visit you. So the purpose of my talk is to show you the therapeutic applications of the MS-39, that, as you already know, is a combined Placido disc and high-resolution anterior segment OCT topographer. So the combination of these two things, a topographer and high-resolution OCT, is able to give us all the utilities of both devices, and also to give us a more accurate measurements of the elevation, curvature, and refractive power maps of the whole cornea. Actually, the MS-39 provides the highest actual resolution among the all pure anterior segment OCTs commercially available. And this very high actual resolution is essential for any corneal and refractive surgeon. It's true that this fact is thanks to the fact that the MS-39 uses a spectral domain technology, and the differences between the sub source and the spectral domain is that the spectral domain provides us a higher resolution, so a better visualization of the cornea, although slightly worse visualization of the angle, while the sub source technology provides a lower resolution of the cornea and a higher resolution at the angle. But for corneal specialists like myself, the fact of having the best resolution in the cornea is the point that makes the difference. And makes the difference in cases like this one. This is a case of a DMEC under DMEC that we already published a couple of years ago, where this high actual resolution is essential in order to be able to differentiate actually the two DMEC layers, no? Because this is a DMEC that failed, and we did the second DMEC without replacing the first one. It's just one under the other, and actually the super high resolution of this device is able to show us where is the first one and where is the second one, and this is thanks to this high resolution capacity. Or, for example, in this other case, where several rebubbling attempts of a DMEC graft, it failed with a recurrent detachment in one sector, and this high resolution of the cornea is able to show us that the reason for this resistant detachment were actually host descending membrane islands that were left during an inaccurate desmatorexis. So, and this is not able to be identified unless we have OCT anterior segment OCT device that it has a very good axial resolution. This other case of our technique described of femtodilec combined with DIMEC for a treatment of corneal edema associated with posterior stromal scarring, where this accurate in the imaging of this accuracy in the imaging of the cornea is able to show us and identify what is the extent and the depth of the scar, planify the stromal dissection, see that this stromal dissection has been accurate, that the outcome of the surgery has been good, that the DIMEC is applied. But for example, in this case, where the following day I saw the IOL, that the IOL was opaque, I was afraid of this was a real opacification of the intraocular lens that has been described occasionally after any endothelial keratoplasty, and I could hopefully see that this was not a real opacification of the lens, but just a deposit of fibrin over the anterior surface of the IOL that actually resolved within a few days. So, on my view, this is the future. No, as we like to have in our phones the highest applications and everything in a one small device. So everything, this applies as well to our practice, where we would like to have several devices in only one machine, as the MS-39 that combines the topography and the OCT. And this is provided by, to the best of my knowledge, by two devices, the MS-39 anterior, but as far as I know, the MS-39 is the only one that it also provides epithelial mapping. That is something that is becoming essential for any corneal and mainly refractive surgeon, as we will see later. So the MS-39 is able to provide us all the things that we already know that are essential as a last generation topographer, together with epithelial mapping, pupillography, dry assessment, lens biometry with IOL calculation, if it is combined with Osiris, the ocular wavefront aberrometry, and also high resolution anterior segment OCT. So epithelial mapping, as I told you, is something that I would like to discuss with some calm, because it's something critical, and it's one of the main advantages that this device is offering us, because it provides all the topographer assessment, and also thanks to the OCT, also the epithelial mapping. So already Dan Reinstein in 2009 already introduced the importance of mapping the corneal epithelium for keratoconus screening. But he did it with Artemis, that is an excellent device, that is uncomfortable for the patient, uncomfortable for the clinician, time-consuming, and that's the reason why it didn't spread. But this is essential because it is already well known the compensatory effect of the corneal epithelium that is able to mask underlying stromal surface irregularities by thinning itself over hills and becoming thicker over valleys. So, for example, if we have a mild keratoconus with a mild stromal irregularity, then the epithelium will be able to thin over it and then provide us a normal anterior keratometry map, but having an underlying disease. No? So that's the reason why today the corneal epithelium evaluation is becoming critical for any preparative refractive surgery assessment, as we're going to see in the following case. What we saw here on the contralateral eye was not just an incidental finding, it was just an early sign of keratoconus on this eye. And this is the proof that both the most sensitive maps on early keratoconus screening are the posterior elevation and the epithelial map. And that's the reason why it's becoming essential for any refractive surgery. Also, as I told, if you combine the MS-39 with Osiris, you're also able to have the ocular barometry. That is also very important to identify those strange cases where we don't find an obvious explanation for loss of vision. For example, this is a case that it wasn't mine, it came for a second opinion. It's a patient that after a smile, it had a significant deterioration of vision with an aided vision of 0.3 in decimal scale and corrected distant visual acuity of 0.6, with a topography, postoperative topography that was overall normal. Here some irregularity, but I would say normal. But in the ocular wavefront, we could say that the quality of image, the retinal quality of image was very poor, and actually here there was an irregularity that was the reason for the loss of vision. And by simulating the removal of the second aberrations, the second order, that is basically the refraction, the quality of vision, it didn't significantly improve. By removing the second, third, and fourth order aberrations, still the image was blurred. And this device allows us to simulate and identify what are the most relevant aberrations for the quality of vision deterioration, and then simulate this with a customized treatment That is what they did in this case, a customized PRK, where the native vision improved to 0.6 and the corrected distance visual acuity to 1 due to a residual hyperopia, but we recovered the normality of this case. And now we're going to focus, so we have seen some of the clinical applications of the MS-39, epithelial mapping, very important, and also the ocular wave from biometry if it is combined with the Osiris. But here, probably the most important part of the presentation is applications as a high-resolution anterior segment OCT. And at the beginning, a lot of people were saying, well, I don't really need an OCT because my pentacam or whatever, my same flow topographer are able to give me some good quality images. And actually, once you compare what is provided by a same flow and what is provided by anterior segment OCT, this is nothing to say. So basically, same flow imaging is just not valid for anterior segment imaging. It's just so poor that is not valid. Others would say, well, we have had the Visante for 20 years now, it works very well. I agree, the Visante was the gold standard, I've used it a lot and was very, very good, but today it's just updated. And if you see the quality of images provided, in this case, it's a case of our clinic, imaged with the Visante and with our MS-39, this is another world. Of course, you cannot planify well any treatment with the qualities that the Visante used to give us, while the MS-39 provides a lot of details that makes possible to planify properly a surgery. Or this other case, okay, of extruded Keraclear, the image by the Visante and by the MS-39 is just another world. And even today, now, the MS-39 is also able to provide an anamorphic image of the corneal layers by straightening the image along its corneal anterior surface, and this allows us, although the image becomes slightly straightened, deformated, allow us to have a more precise evaluation of details of only a few microns. And this is critical for things that are very, very small. This anamorphic image is able to provide us images that before were just not possible, and to understand the diseases as we have never understood them before without a proper biopsy and histological assessment. For example, this is a case of mine, of epithelial basement membrane dystrophy, where this anamorphic image it has so high resolution that it's able to identify small asymptomatic detachments, microscopic detachments that are there in this disease, and probably this day later will detach, creating an episode of pain and a blister. So now we're going to see some diseases, or what I consider probably some of the most important diseases where this combination of anterior segment OCT and topographer are able to just change our practice. And probably the most important one of them is keratoconus, because we have a super good last generation topographer that, thanks to the OCT technology, is able to provide us a better and most accurate maps, and also the epithelial mapping. And this is critical. This is a typical case of keratoconus. There is no doubt of that. But here, this is the typical example of the epithelial mapping changes, epithelial changes on a typical keratoconus case, where we have a thinning, a focal thinning of the epithelial map at the apex of the cone, with a surrounding thickening of the epithelium around the cone in what Dan Richten already called like a donut shape. And this is just critical for any refractive surgery assessment, because will allow us to discard refractive surgery, or at least discard the LASIK, for patients that are actually in risk, and we wouldn't be identifying them otherwise with older topographers. Because as I showed you before, the most early and sensitive maps to this form frustre or early keratoconus are the posterior elevation and the focal thinning of the epithelial map, are the two most sensitive changes in the topography of these cases. But also will allow us not to only discard patients for laser refractive surgery, but also to rescue some patients that otherwise it wouldn't have benefited. We wouldn't have benefit from a laser procedure or from, for example, a LASIK, no, or a SMILE. And this is a case where the typical case of inferior asymmetry. Okay, and in this case, we would either do a PRK or a intraocular procedure like a fake KOL. But here, this case is quite common. We see an inferior asymmetry, very obvious. We say, oh, this could be keratoconus, but on the other hand, we see an absolutely normal posterior elevation map. And although the corneal thickness in this case, actually the cornea is thin, there is not an asymmetry, there is not inferior displacement of this thinnest point. And actually, if we look at the epithelial map, we see that the epithelium at this point of asymmetry is not only thinned, it's actually thickened. So the reason for this inferior asymmetry is just because the epithelium is thicker. So this is not a keratoconus, and we can go for refractive surgery. Of course, in this case, I would do a PRK because the cornea is thin, but this is not a keratoconus, and this patient is not on risk. Like this other one, again, inferior asymmetry, absolutely normal, posterior elevation map, and a thin inferior thickened epithelium, justifying this asymmetry on the anterior keratometry. And this is what we call pseudoectasia, and here you can proceed with laser for refractive surgery. In this case, due to the pachymetry, I would go for a PRK. But of course I would do it unless we have a very high ametropia. In that case, just because of the thickness, I would go then for a fake KOL, but for a small ametropia, you can go for a. And also, along the next few months, the CSO is going to implement the automatic keratoconus screening, the MS-39. It does, for all these cases, to give us a super complete evaluation and assessment, automatic assessment of the keratoconus risk. And this would be, and this here we have these places, this is a lot of information, but we have the whole corneal thickness, the stromal thickness map, the epithelial thickness map, the posterior surface and anterior surface elevation, the Gaussian maps, and the comparison with the control. Along with this is a lot of information, but this is a normal case, a suspicious case, an abnormal pathological case, and also the enantiomorphism, that is basically when there is difference between one eye and the contralateral eye. So probably the most important disease that will take advantage of this is the keratoconus, but also we can find applications to basically any corneal anterior segment disease. For example, this is a case of mine for a focal epithelial ingrowth after a SMILE that I controlled it with JAK, but then the patient developed a secondary astigmatism with about 1.5 diopters, I believe it was. Okay, and here we see that everything is normal, but we have this bow tie justifying the residual refractive astigmatism. If we look at the OCT, we see that there is here this deposit. This is the debris area of the previous ingrowth here. But if we look at the anamorphic image, that as I told you, is the highest resolution possible. Now here is the only way we understand why we had this residual astigmatism, because this debris deposit here, it was actually an occupying space lesion, okay, that was bulking, pushing the surrounding stroma here, deformating the stroma and generating the astigmatism. Here we see, and now we can understand why this debris of epithelial ingrowth generated as a residual astigmatism and actually ended up evacuating this deposit. Or this, for example, this case of posterior keratoconus, very rare, we can see it as never before, and we can understand the disease as never before, where the posterior elevation is so much than the mild anterior disease. But actually we see here, this is the perfect example of the epithelial remodeling, where it becomes thinner on the peaks and thicker on the valleys. And here basically the main value of this is because I was thinking of doing a PK or a DALK in this case, and I wanted to see precisely the depth of this scar tissue. And actually I could see that the scar was also affecting the descending membrane endothelium. So in my view, there was no reason, no sense to do a DALK here, because the underneath tissues and layers they still remain opaque. So here, if we have to do something, probably we have to do a PK. Also, we do our late LASIK enhancements usually by a flap lift, unless the flap edges are not very good. Usually we do a lift, And the OCT is critical in order to see the depth of the flap and see if the tissue that is underneath is enough in order to have the ablation that is needed. And this is the image that is provided only by when we do the topography. The MS-39 provided us just a basic OCT image. Okay, this is when we do the same but with a proper OCT software. Okay, where here we see that this could be the flap thickness, the flap edge. Okay, but we are sure that if we do the anamorphic image, we then see that actually this black line is the depth, is the interface, the surgical interface of the previous LASIK. Okay, and then we can precisely measure the thickness that is underneath. But also here we can see again the example of the epithelial remodeling. This is a previous myopic LASIK where the epithelium has become thicker at the center, okay, in order to compensate the thinning. And here we see in the epithelial map how the epithelium is thicker in the center than in the periphery due to this compensatory effect after a central ablation of in the context of a myopic ablation. Or also another example is corneal scarring. Fundamental, essential. We need OCT in order to see how deep are the scars and what are the structures that are involved. In order to see, we need a corneal transplant, a PTK, or just a superficial keratectomy, like in this case, where if we look at the scars of these cases of a radial keratotomy, we see that these scars are just nodules within the epithelial layer. But actually, we could see that the Bowman's membrane and this underlying stroma is unremarkable. So here, we don't even need a PTK ablation. It's just a superficial keratectomy because these scars will come off once we remove the epithelium and nothing else is needed. Also, MS-39 is able to provide us a real life images. Like for example, this is a case of mine of, well, all our cases of mine, a DMEC underneath a PK, a failed PK with a secondary DMEC. This is a few days later. There were some detachments. I wasn't sure if Rebion or not. A few days later, the detachment didn't get slightly better, but I was a bit concerned of these descents at the graft host edge junction. And a few days later, the whole thing detached because these descents just got worse, and I had to rebubble the DMEC and resuture the graft, hopefully with a good, successful anatomical outcome, like you see here. And this video can give us the 360 degrees mapping that is essential for any DMEC surgeon in order to see in one shot to see how is the DMEC all around the cornea. And this is probably one of the last applications and most important applications I've seen for the MS-39, that is in the ocular surface squamous neoplasia, that probably for you in Australia is a much higher issue than for us in Europe, because as well, you know much better than me that Australia is one of the world leaders in skin cancer, and probably you are seeing these lesions with a much higher frequency than myself. But this was a 92-year-old lady that came with this lesion, diagnosed by other colleague by a pterygium. Of course, this was not a pterygium. You see here in the epithelial map how the epithelium is thickening in that section. And the MS-39, the OCT technology, allow us to just make the diagnosis without a biopsy, because already Carol Karp from Bascom Palmer already described the specific signs of OSSCN by using an ultra high definition anterior segment OCT. The problem is that device didn't become commercial, but today the resolution of the anterior segment OCT, like the MS-39, is so high that it's able to give us these same specificity signs, but just by having a commercial device. And these signs are the thickened epithelium, hyperreflective epithelium, with an abrupt transition zone from normal to abnormal epithelium. And today, the resolution of the MS-39 anterior segment OCT is so high that it's able to give us these signs, and this preclude us from the need to do a biopsy in, for example, this 92-year-old lady, where the anamorphic image was showing absolutely nicely these three signs of thickened, hyperreflective epithelium with an abrupt transition zone between the normal and the abnormal epithelium. And here the signs were so clear I didn't even do a biopsy. It was not necessary. Just started on a topical chemotherapy with interferon alpha 2b 4 times a day for 4 months with a complete resolution of the lesion. But again, here it was not necessary to do a biopsy, was not necessary to do a surgery, and here was not necessary to do any impression cytology or anything to see if the lesion recurred or not, because the anterior segmental CT also gave us this information. Here we can see that the lesion has completely solved, okay? The epithelium has again become normal, and in the anamorphic image we can see that there is no residual lesion. So by doing this in the follow-ups, you don't need any impression cytology, biopsies, or anything. You can just monitor and detect early any recurrence of the lesion. Just remember that the anterior segmental CT is able to map and show intraocular structures even in opaque corneas unless there is no calcium. Okay, but unless there is no calcium, it doesn't matter if the cornea is opaque, the anterior segmental CT will give you information about how are the intraocular structures. And of course, it's essential in both the preoperative and postoperative assessment for phakic IOL implantation, because it's necessary in order to measure the distance from the IOL to the endothelium, and also the bolt, that is the distance from the IOL to the crystalline, the anterior crystalloid. And also, in the case of posterior chamber phakic IOLs, the bolt it can give you the dynamic bolt, because as you know, the bolt changes depending on the light conditions. And if, for example, you have a high bolt in the scotopic condition, this high bolt can become even higher, and you need to identify this. And this, for example, is the case with, if you see the scotopic pupil, myopic pupil, and photopic pupil, how the bolt reduces. So thank you very much. That's all that I wanted to share with you. I hope you have enjoyed. I hope next time I could be with you in Australia. Nevertheless, you have here, this is an atlas of anterior segmental CT that we published this year or last, it was released this year. Okay, and anything you need from me, here you have my contact email. Thank you very much for the invitation. And if you have any question, I will be able to share it with you.
Es que estoy en una teleconferencia. 10 minutos.
Why, that was most interesting. I was interested by, and I kind of missed the point, of what you're doing with late enhancements. I've had a refractive surgery clinic for 25 years, and I got a lot of those now, coming from a long time ago. What were the tips that you had in the use of the MS-39 in helping with these?
Yes, thank you, Rick, for the question. So for when we have to do a late enhancement of a LASIK, even if it is very, very old, we attempt to do always, if possible, a flap lift, okay? Unless, so basically what I do, I see the patient, I make sure that the edges of the old flap are fine. For example, if I see previous ingrowth or significant scars at the edges, or the edges are traumatized, and I can expect that if I lift that flap, it's gonna be, I'm gonna induce a significant trauma, and then that is gonna increase the risk of ingrowth, then in those cases, we don't do it, we do a PRK. But if the edges are fine, the flap is fine, then with the MS-39, what we do is to see the thickness of the flap. Because if the flap, it wasn't ours or was done many years ago with a microkeratome, with the MS-39 help us to see how thick is the flap, and then to estimate what is going to be the residual stromal bed after the enhancement. Okay, and if it's fine, then we go ahead. Many of the patients that we do, either they, as I told you, they are very old, so with the microkeratome you couldn't be precise on the thickness, or they are from other clinics, and you need to know how thick is the flap. Because, for example, I remember one patient I saw recently that he had a theoretically good tomographic map, but suddenly when I saw the OCT image, I could see that the flap was 200 microns thick, and that changed completely, because it's not the same. If you have 450 thinnest point and the flap is 100, okay, but if it is 200, then in that case, the expected residual stromal bed is going to be too low, and you cannot proceed. So basically, the OCT technology helps to see the thickness of the flap and then estimate the stromal bed.
Do you, rather than lift flaps, sometimes with the HDOCT, you can measure the flap, you can see whether you've got enough flap to cut a flap above it or below it. Is that something that you like to do?
So I missed the question.
So one thing I found with being able to define the flap thickness and define the residual stromal bed on cases that you might not have seen before, if you want to cut a second flap instead of relifting.
Yes, absolutely. Of course, if you have, for example, a very thin flap and you have enough tissue, you can do a second flap below, or if you have a very thick flap, you can do it in between. In general, we don't do it as in general, because we rather prefer to lift the flap if possible, or to go for a PRK. The fact of creating a second flap is something possible, is published, okay? But as our outcomes by lifting flap are very good, and actually they are published in JCRS from 2019, where the rate of having a clinically significant epithelial ingrowth that requires a second intervention is 4% only, we are more confident with lifting the flap. But nevertheless, I agree that the OCT will help you to create either a new flap below or within, depending on the thickness of the flap, and you need OCT to measure that.
What sort of margin would you like to leave between the interface and the new flap?
So say that again.
What margin? 30 microns, 40, 50 microns between the interface and the new flap?
You mean if you create a new flap?
What margin between the old interface and the new flap?
Okay, so in that case, I guess that you mean if you are facing a thick flap where you can create a new flap within the stromal flap, the stroma of the flap, then I would leave at least 30 microns. 30,
I think that's reason. I think that's right. I have a question here from one of the participants, Jessica Billier. She says, do you perform trans-PRK treatments, and do you use epithelial thickness map when you perform the treatment?
Ideally, you should, okay? The thing is that only the latest, we have the Swindamaris, and only the latest update allows you to introduce the epithelial thickness map, the epithelial thickness that is provided by the MS-39 into the laser, okay? So with the last update, you can do it, but the previous version of the Swindamaris didn't allow you to do it. So it depends on of course, if you have the MS-39 and you have the Swindamaris, depends on the version. If you have the old version, you cannot. Okay, if you do a trans-PRK, the laser will estimate a central thickness of a standard central thickness of 55 microns, and then that's the reason why, in those cases, then I recommend always to do not a trans-PRK unless it's a therapeutic treatment. Of course, if it is a therapeutic treatment, you have to do trans-PRK, but if it is just a regular refractive PRK, I used to remove the epithelium in all those cases because the Amaris Swin will create a mistake on estimating the central epithelial thickness. If you have the latest update, you can import that data into the laser, and the laser will create the ablation profile according to the real epithelial thickness. Nevertheless, you have to be careful because the epithelial thickness map can be artifacted by so many things. For example, previous dry eye, or if the patient didn't stop the contact lenses for enough time, or a bad measurement. Those things can create an artifact on the epithelial map, and then that you will be translated that into the ablation profile. And that's the reason why for refractive treatments, I still prefer regular alcohol PRK to make sure that I don't create any mistake on that regard.
Thank you very much, Jorge. Jeremy. We have no more questions.
I think we have done. There's no more question, I think. I would like to say thanks again first to Dr. Wolfe and Dr. Alio. for your kind participation and interesting speech. And also to my colleagues, we would like to thank you all, the attendees, in the name of CSO as well, and Jeremy as the managing director of Eyetek. I don't know if Jeremy, you want to say something in the end.
Yes, I'm very. But once again, I'm very impressed with the technology, and it's always too much information for me, and but it's incredible, and I think it's very hard to put the system and the technology you guys put together. As the representative of the brand and the technology in Austria, of course, we are available to assist anyone here, which we already do, but you know where to find us. And I really want to, once again, I know I've done it already, but I'm very grateful for all the support for you guys from CSO, for Dr. Wolfe and Dr. Del Barrio. Muchas gracias para participar hoy. Because it's for us it's very important to I'm not a doctor, I'm not a clinical person in the first place, and it's very important for us to provide information about this very extensive and advanced technology. And I hope that the audience today has been able to enjoy the experience of everyone and the feedback from the engineer behind the device. So thank you very much, all of you, and once again, we're here to discuss it further if anyone has any question later on. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank
you. Again.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Have a lovely evening. Have a great day. Hasta luego. Muchas gracias, Dr. Del Barrio.
Hasta luego, un placer.